jump for some approximate numbers because we're all doing our best. But approximately 47 million people quit their jobs last year. About 4 million a month, with it being about 3.5 million in 2019. So the numbers are big, right? These are big aliens numbers. Back in 2011 and 2012, it was floating at about 2 million a month. Now, populations have changed and some of that as well. So, but in that same time period, it's interesting because we saw about an 11% increase in the total number of people employed, as far as I can tell. And these people aren't necessarily quitting the job market altogether. In fact, probably most aren't, but looking for something different. So one of the questions is this: why are people quitting? Most estimates, now again, this is big studies on big populations of people that miss all the nuance, but most estimates say that about 40% of employees are quitting because of either low pay, disrespect from their manager, or a lack of career advancement, if they were to look at these overall trends. So at a global level, with those big numbers, we know that more people are moving around into new jobs. And it's interesting too, is we also know that unemployment rates are decreasing. They're about 3.5% right now, which is fascinating because I don't know if any of you took micro and macro econ, but I was always fascinated by the idea that, why does employment have to be at a certain level? Like, we don't want zero unemployment, which is always interesting. We're not doing that today. The challenge with low unemployment is that as organizations compete for talent, this is the argument economically, begin to pay more, inflation follows, another big bag we will not dip into today. Trust me on this. So the big question is this: those national statistics certainly matter and impact us locally, but there's little we can do about them at the local or maybe even the corporate level. So what is important for us to pay attention to today? I know that some of you have lots of convictions about impacting those national statistics, and those are important too, but what can we do today at the level of the boots on the ground in our organizations? And I want to call us back to this. When you hear those statistics, think about this: what anxiety, if any, does it produce in you, and why? And maybe even more importantly, what can you do about it? And if you don't feel any anxiety, please do not fact over the anxiety of others as if they're stupid for being anxious. Like, business owners have real challenges. And for us to minimize them is to dismiss them as ridiculous, as naive, and lacks compassion, to be honest. Like, there's, to come alongside that. So that's a long intro for this. I'm Dr. Rob McKenna, and welcome to the Wild Conversation, where we make the best thinking in psychology, leadership, and organizational science accessible to leaders who are willing to learn and edit for their sake and for the sake of others. And today we're beginning our new series on staffing problems. Oh, that's what a really high energy topic, right? Staffing problems, and specifically when the right people leave. In future weeks, we're going to dive into some other things: misalignment of purpose, how to attract the wrong people, staffing for the long haul, lots of different topics we're going to get into. So we can talk about statistics all day long related to what, people refer to as the Great Resignation. But what I am most interested in is the reality at the shop floor, on the ground where the boots are, of what you are experiencing. And for some of those numbers I mentioned before, like bringing up the anxiety, you quite literally some of you cannot find labor, or some of you are people who are interviewing for jobs and not taking jobs, or, when you decided to show up today, it was because you were having staff problems and you wish some of your folks would move on to better fits somewhere else. Like, that's what staffing problems mean for some of you. For some of you, the framer in your construction business is so transient because they can just get paid more down the street. They can literally walk onto a different job site and get paid more. And others of you, those statistics make you pause because you're looking for that amazing job, and the pressures of what you perceive as an overemployed population make you feel like you can't keep up. I think some of this is happening. I have friends of mine are experiencing this. Or you're asking yourself the question: what is the market looking like for the job that I may feel called to? And regardless of your reality related to what's happening in industry, what's important, but that we cannot control, What's our perspective today what it's going to be about today is about seeing staffing problems as more than a great resignation or a trying to fill roles as fast as we can, or as I've got problem people working for me. This is fundamentally about this question. How do we think about staffing, the job market, our businesses, and our staffing needs through a whole leader development lens? How do we put all this in perspective? What would change in your staffing problems or job search if your organization or the organization you are looking at working for had a clear mission regarding how it serves or how you serve others? If employees were engaged and motivated and aligned with that mission, and every employee was on a path toward understanding the call in their lives and work, their competence, their blind spots, their unique motivations, was getting feedback from their manager who knew how to talk with them, and they were considering how they could help others on your team. Imagine what would that look like if your organization was like that. And here's an idea for the next 3 years. How would it impact your capacity to deal with a staffing problem down the road? Do you hear what I'm trying to invite us into? Like, if we started to think about it differently now, how would it impact us if we were facing this thing we're facing today down the road? And if you're looking for a job, would it make a difference if the business you're interviewing with had a clear mission about its employees and customers, and every employee was telling that story? When you begin to change your culture and make a systematic investment in seeing yourself through a whole leader development lens, and also investing in everyone else in your organization, seeing themselves, all people will begin to discern things they knew were important but didn't realize they could discern. That's what intentionality regarding development does. And if you feel like I have a lot of conviction about this, I do, because we see it every day in so many of your businesses. You start to see what you could not see. So when you begin to provide a way for your people to see their competence, their areas for growth and development, to think about the calling and purpose behind their work and life, to examine their motivations, and to get surrounded so they can get feedback and support, and your managers do the same and encourage it all, the right people will see the fit. Or if they don't, some of those right people will move on to find it elsewhere. And this is a lot. And those who either aren't ready to learn or don't fit your culture or performance and develop of performance and development will see the lack of it and begin to think about moving on before maybe you ever have to have that conversation, as just this moment where it's that hard conversation. And what I mean by all of this is that regardless of what happens in the economy, there are certain things that always did this issue of staffing problems. And you all know, those of you that know me know I am not minimizing the pressure on this for some of you. The staffing problems just gave us a reason to get back to what was really important for some of us. Are we here to simply grow a business or to find a job that pays well? Or is the story more complex than that? Is there a story that is more complex than the national survey research that says that people are leaving for pay, promotion, and respect? There is, and there is worthwhile psychological research that supports it, and it's not new. It's not new. This is all about when the right people leave and when the right people leave. You know what I mean? It's like, it's both sides of this. The right people leave, the ones you already knew probably needed to go, because true whole and intentional leader development will cause the resistance to emerge onto the table. You already knew it was there because some of these people were causing a lot of problems for your teams already. You just invited them to see it for themselves. And as you begin to think about staffing and employment through a developmental and performance lens, people will begin to discern their fit with the job you have given them. I will never forget a couple years ago, I've said this before, but a CEO said to Daniel and to me, they said, hey, so let me get this straight. Let me get this straight, McKenna Halleck. If I put your system for developing whole people in place in my organization, are you saying that some of them will leave? And I'll remember this moment. We looked at each other And we both said, yes. To which that CEO said, good. Why is this so? Why would a leader want some people to leave? Why do we all get this and know it's funny? You know what I mean? It's like every time I tell that, every senior leader gets it. It's because we've worked with people who are not ready, who don't fit, who aren't productive. We've all had these people in our organizations. And sometimes it's us, right? But it begs other questions. I mean, these are big questions, right? That we're responsible for as leaders. Number one, like, why are the wrong people staying in the first place? I can't tell you how many major corporations that talk a big game over the years, over the last couple of decades of my career about firing people, and what they actually do is just move bad fits and problem people around the business. You know, it's like, and I'm not saying there are problem people and there are great, like we all have been those problem people, right? So number two, would you rather hire the right people and grow well, or hire just anybody and grow fast? I know these are hard questions. I know that. Number three, as our organizations grow, are there more places to hide? I would say absolutely yes. One of the biggest challenges we face as we scale is there's more places to hide. Maybe some of us have hidden before, you know? And number four is, without pruning, does anything grow? I don't know if anything grows well in our world without pruning. And sometimes I have this giant hydrangea in our yard. My wife cut to the ground last year. I'm not saying cut to the ground, but that bush is massive this summer. Like, it's crazy, right? And so sometimes you got to prune back a bit to get the whole bush back, you know, for a season of next level growth on mission. And this is where a sidebar on leadership differentiation and courage, I think, is necessary, is that when you begin I got to put this out there. When you begin to invest in peoples that they have never seen before, it takes a mountain of courage to stay the course. The reactive few in your organization will push back. And what I mean is, as you begin to invite them into a very cool process of seeing themselves as parts of a team and seeing themselves with some specificity, they will push back, because it's what we do as human beings when change occurs. Change causes many of us to resist, but less so when we've been invited to come along or to leave. And for those who aren't developmentally ready, that invitation to lift the veil on things that they may not want to see will cause them either to fight to push the veil back down, run, leave the organization, or accept the invitation after a time as they begin to see that you mean it. You mean it, that you're truly going to do business and developing your people differently. And they will scatter into three groups. Some of you heard me talk about this before. You will have reds, the resistors. No way I'm doing this, and I'm going to gossip at the water cooler about you, manager or CEO. I'm going to blame you, pull out the old stories about when you did it wrong, and I'll say things like, I don't do all this self-awareness stuff. You'll have yellows. You'll have people, the questioners is what I call them. I'll push back a bit through questions. I'll ask things like, why are we doing this? What is this about? What will be in it for me? And what will I get out of it? While these questions sound tough, they're indicators, when we see yellows, that the person is interested, but doesn't know how to trust it yet. And then there's greens, the supporters, those who will say, I can't believe we're going to do this. Thank you. Where was this when I was younger? When's our next meeting together? I'm excited. And here's the leader's challenge: is if you spend too much time with the reds, yellows, and yellows, and with that group, the greens will eventually lose energy because of that lack of courage to keep going. So it does take fortitude to stand in that. And I know that for some of you, you feel desperation and fear in those moments when staffing gets tight, or we have problems with our current staff. But, and you already know this, we rarely make the best decisions based on fear or desperation. We make our best decisions based on wisdom, discernment, moments for strategic pause, and asking better questions. And how would your perspective on staffing change if you took a long-term perspective? We're crystal clear about the purpose behind your business, and we're focusing on growing well over just growing and surviving. You can survive the water in two ways. You can learn to swim and float, or you can flop in the water in desperation to stay afloat. And by the way, when I say you, y'all, I can put you, McKenna, like just I've got, I'm talking about myself. The swimming and the floating takes calm thinking and time to learn. And when we build our model on averages alone, the things that we hear that cause fear in us, in other words, we build our staffing models or even our job search framework on those national averages of pay, respect, and promotion. That's all we build it on. We may miss all the right people who want to work for us and the opportunity to grow our business well and not just simply and fast. And it's interesting just to think for a moment. I'm gonna go through this very quickly, but it's fascinating to think about what causes motivation to occur, because motivation is a big part of this staffing thing, right? We want people who are here, the right people who are motivated to be here. And we know a lot about this from research, from decades of research on what motivates people, just in terms of job structure. But it's interesting when we just focus on these national pressures without focusing on what it is that people are looking for to be motivated. The focus is on filling jobs. It's like putting a screwdriver in your toolbox and expecting all the screws in the house to get tighter. You hear what I'm saying? It's like people are not, it's like that simply by putting someone in the business, it's going to get better. We want the right person. And people are not screwdrivers either, right? They are better because they can actually figure out where the loose screws are. Can you imagine that? So when we put that employee into our actual house, what do they need to be successful and motivated and engaged? And we're going to spend more time on this. We'll spend a little bit more time on this in future weeks, but there's some interesting things about skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. This is a model called the job characteristics model that has been studied for so long. That's so critical for us to think about even structuring jobs, because so much of our staffing problems, if we took these 5 things seriously, staffing problems would look very, very different. And so we'll talk about what that all looks like in future weeks. So these are human beings and not screwdrivers. So they bring so much more capacity to figure it out on their own, but they also have a will, deep desires, and a capacity to either choose to be selfish or to sacrificially invest in others around them. And we assume sometimes we assume that they're just vending machines that always want more. And it's just not so. Money matters, but it doesn't matter as much as we think. In fact, money has been shown to be a motivator with what's called a hygiene factor. It will get you from a -5 to a 0 in terms of your motivation, but it's never going to get you to a 5. So it's necessary, but it's not sufficient for the level of staffing solution that we're thinking about. So here, I want to give you 3 places to start this conversation. We have other weeks we're going to dig more deeply into. So if some of you, especially when I mentioned those 5 things, some of you are like, let's go. We'll spend more time on that later. But I want to give you 3 ideas as we get this series going. 3 places to start. Number 1, courageously and counterculturally develop your managers as whole leaders, and start with yourself. Everything in that job characteristics model, so much of it relies on our capacity of our managers. The whole concept of feedback, like we can tell people, if we give feedback, people will be more motivated. It's more complex than that, right? So how do we invest in our managers in a way that they begin to understand themselves, and they understand how feedback gets communicated, they understand their own communication patterns under pressure and so on. So we make that countercultural move. We develop them as whole people. Number 2, we create meaningful and motivating work. We create meaningful and motivating work. To do that, we have to figure out what's important. Why are we here as a business or an organization? And to not feel shame if you haven't figured that out yet, but we'll be talking about that in future weeks. To do that. And then it's not just that. Your best source of future staff is your current staff. So they tell the story and they will find your next great people. And so that's why we talk about this, think about becoming that destination, which we'll also continue to unpack in future weeks. So let's keep the conversation going.